Story 1. The Backwoods in Appalachia. In the dense forests of the Appalachian Mountains, there is an area known for its eerie legends and stories of strange occurrences. One of the most unsettling accounts comes from a group of campers who were staying in a secluded part of the woods in West Virginia. The group, consisting of 3 friends, had planned a weekend camping trip to get away from their busy lives. They chose a remote spot deep in the forest, far from any established campgrounds or trails. The first night passed without incident. The group set up their tents, built a fire, and shared stories under the dark sky, enjoying the quiet serenity of the forest. But as the night wore on, they began to notice something strange. There was a feeling that they were being watched. At first, it was just a vague sense of unease, like someone was lurking just beyond the reach of their campfire light. They laughed it off, thinking it was simply their imagination playing tricks on them. However, as the evening progressed, the feeling grew stronger. One of the campers, Tom, ventured out into the woods to relieve himself. As he walked a short distance from the campsite, he began to hear rustling noises in the bushes, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was nearby. He looked around, but saw nothing. Returning to camp, Tom mentioned his unease to the others, but they dismissed it as just typical forest sounds. Yet, as the night grew darker, the feeling of being watched became almost overwhelming. Every twig snap, every rustle in the underbrush, seemed to carry with it a sense of danger. Around midnight, things took a terrifying turn. The group heard the distinct sound of footsteps crunching on the dry leaves just outside their camp. They assumed it was another camper or a hiker, but when they called out to ask who it was, there was no response. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and the silence was deafening. They decided to investigate, but when they ventured into the woods with flashlights, there was no one to be found. The unease persisted, and it wasn't long before strange things started happening. Their food began to disappear overnight, and items would be moved from one place to another. They found their tents disturbed, as if someone had been rifling through their belongings. But most disturbing of all was the feeling that no matter where they went, they were being followed. Each time they turned around, there was no one there. The group finally decided they had had enough and packed up to leave. As they made their way back to their car, they noticed a strange figure standing silently in the woods, just beyond the tree line. It was a man wearing old, tattered clothing, but his face was obscured by shadows. They called out to him, but he didn't move. When they looked back moments later, the figure was gone. The unsettling experience didn't end there. Several weeks later, one of the campers returned to the area to retrieve some gear he had left behind. He encountered an elderly man who lived in the nearby town. The man had heard about the group's visit to the woods and had a chilling story to share. Story 2. A creepy encounter in the Alaskan wilderness. The vast wilderness of Alaska has long been a place of both beauty and danger, attracting explorers, hunters, and thrill seekers from around the world. One of the most unsettling camping horror stories comes from a professional guide who was leading a group on a remote trip into the Alaskan backcountry. The guide, a seasoned outdoorsman named Greg, was known for his extensive knowledge of the terrain and his ability to handle even the most dangerous situations. He had guided many expeditions into the wilderness, and he knew how to navigate the treacherous landscapes, including icy rivers, dense forests, and jagged mountain peaks. One day, Greg took a small group of campers on a multi-day trip into the wilderness, where they would be staying in a secluded cabin. The group was excited, but they also knew the risks of camping in such an isolated location. It wasn't long before they realized that Greg was acting strangely. On the second night of the trip, as the group huddled around the fire, they noticed that Greg seemed unusually quiet. His usually calm and confident demeanor was replaced by a tense, almost paranoid air. He kept looking over his shoulder, glancing nervously into the trees. The campers didn't know what to make of it, but they didn't question it either. At some point in the night, Greg stood up abruptly and walked into the woods without saying a word. The group called after him, but he didn't respond. They assumed he was just going to check something or relieve himself, but as hours passed and he still didn't return, they began to worry. The next morning, they decided to search for Greg. After several hours of looking, they found him. He was lying face down in the snow, his body stiff and cold. There were no signs of injury, and his equipment was still intact. But the most chilling detail was that his eyes were wide open in terror, and his face was frozen in a look of absolute horror. The campers quickly returned to the nearest town and contacted authorities. An investigation was launched, but no clear cause of death could be determined. Some speculated that Greg had suffered a heart attack or stroke, while others believed he had encountered something in the wilderness that had terrified him to the point of collapse. Story 3: The Lost Trail in the Rockies. One of the most chilling camping experiences comes from a group of hikers who set out to explore a lesser-known trail in the Rocky Mountains. The group consisted of 4 friends who were all experienced hikers and campers. They had spent numerous weekends in the mountains, always coming back with amazing stories and photos to share. But this particular trip would become something they would never be able to forget. The hike began like any other. The sun was shining. The weather was perfect, and the group was in high spirits. They were following a trail that wound through dense forests, then up into a series of ridges and valleys. The route was remote, rarely traversed by other hikers, which was part of the appeal for the group. After several hours of trekking, they reached a campsite near a mountain creek. It was getting late, so they set up their tents and prepared to settle in for the night. The group spent the evening around the fire, chatting, telling stories, and enjoying the peace of the wilderness. However, things took a strange turn the following morning. One of the hikers, Alex, woke up earlier than the others and decided to go for a quick solo hike to explore a nearby ridge. Alex had always enjoyed solo hikes, and everyone knew he would be back soon. But when the others awoke and realized Alex was still missing, a feeling of unease began to set in. At first, the group thought Alex had just gone on a longer hike, as he sometimes did. But as hours passed with no sign of him, panic began to spread. They started to search the area, calling his name and retracing his steps from the previous day. After several hours, they contacted authorities, and a search and rescue operation was launched. The search went on for days, but there was no trace of Alex. No footprints, no belongings, not even a faint sign of his presence. The group was devastated, and the search effort was eventually called off. It wasn't until months later, during a routine search of the area for a completely unrelated incident, that a hiker stumbled upon something eerie. Buried beneath a pile of rocks was Alex's backpack, still intact, with all his belongings inside. Strangely, there were no signs of animal activity, no disturbance to the surrounding foliage, and no evidence of any struggle. But the most disturbing part was the location. It was several miles from the trail where Alex had last been seen, and it was in an area that had been searched thoroughly months earlier. To this day, the disappearance of Alex remains a mystery. Some speculate that he encountered something or someone while hiking alone, something that led to his sudden vanishing. Others believe he may have fallen into a hidden ravine or suffered some kind of psychological breakdown that caused him to wander far from the path. Whatever happened, his fate is unknown, and the wilderness has kept its secrets.